Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Brian Custer, the host of Showtime Championship Boxing, and welcome to the unveiling of the Showtime boxing schedule for this spring and summer. You know, it's only appropriate that we do it now, considering this past week, Showtime Championship Boxing celebrated its 36th year of providing fight fans some of the biggest fights in the sport. And it all started back in March of 1986, Hagler versus Mugabe. And since then, let's be honest, we've been the longest, most trusted, undisputed network leader in the sport of boxing. And our collection of talent, unquestionably the strongest, most experienced, best voices in the sport. We've got 5 International Boxing Hall of Famers, from Al Bernstein, Steve Farhood, Jim Gray, Barry Tompkins, to the classy Jimmy Lennon Jr., as well as a couple of former champions. We've added to the mix Raul Marquez, Abner Mares, and then you add the best play-by-play voice in the sport in Mauro Ranallo, myself out in front. There is no network that compares to our collection of talent. And we are led by the best executive producer in sports television in David Dinkins Jr. He's been at the helm since 1986, along with director extraordinaire, I call him, Bob Dunphy. And we surround the sport with at Showtime with some of the best programming that boxing fans really crave, from the Emmy award-winning series All Access to compelling podcasts. We've got the Morning Combat, the Showtime Boxing Podcast, and now the newly added Last Stand with yours truly. 2021, Showtime had an unprecedented year. We had 25 live boxing events, 80 total fights, 13 world title fights, including 3 unification fights. 2 of those were for the undisputed title. And instead of really just sitting on our laurels, patting ourselves on the back, 2022 will be another exceptional year, bringing you the biggest fights with some of the biggest names in the sport. Errol Spence Jr., Gervonta Davis, Jermell Charlo, to David Benavidez, Stephen Fulton Jr., and Jerome Boots, and it's just some of the names you'll see on the network this year. So, you know what? Let me introduce the man who I have a tremendous amount of respect for, because not only his intellect, but his undeniable passion for the sport and how he continues to challenge us and this network to evolve while making sure he delivers some of the best marquee matchups that boxing fans crave, while always being accessible to you, the fighting media. It's no secret why I call him, he's boxing's best friend. He is the president of sports and event programming for Showtime Networks, Stephen Espinoza.
Thank you very much, Brian.
My man.
Appreciate the intro. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. Talk to us about what's this year and what we've got coming up.
Well, I feel like maybe we should be live on CBS with this, because this is sort of Selection Sunday for us. These are our bracketology. These are, we're behind closed doors in the room with little slips of paper, venues, dates, fighter rankings. It's our own miniature version of the NCAA selection. Except for us, we're trying to present the sport, to organize the sport, and give viewers a sense of sort of organization and a sense of logic, and something to look forward to from now through, as we'll soon see, through July.
In a sport that is so competitive, how big of a task is it to continue to deliver what we like to say a meaningful, high-stake fights that boxing fans want?
Well, look, the sport is constantly evolving, constantly changing, and whether it's new talent or an upset, nothing ever stays the same. So the reality, we've got to be the same way and take the same approach. We had a great year last year. We can't sit on our laurels, because again, we are on a constant mission to serve the boxing public, to our viewers, do the best quality programming, the best fights that we possibly can, and to be cutting edge on the production. So look, that requires constant vigilance.
And there are a number of networks who say, okay, we have a schedule, but we do it a little bit different. We always lay out a number of fights, and here, we're gonna do this today. Talk to me about how hard is that to put something like this together?
Look, it is challenging. It is difficult. It's like herding cats. I've used that analogy before. But the reality, it's completely worth it. I understand why not many other networks, and I don't think anyone does it the way we do. It is time-consuming. It is sometimes tedious, but the reality is it's necessary. There is no other sport that just rolls out sort of 1 week at a time. If you imagine the NBA, the NFL, Major League Baseball saying, here's our schedule for June or July. No, let's roll it out and give people something to look forward to. Television programming is scripted. No network says, okay, we're going to give you a couple shows that we're going to premiere in September, and then we'll let you know about October, November. Now, look, sometimes that's the way the sport has to work.
Yeah.
But where possible, we want to do the extra work, go the extra mile, and provide something for fans to look forward to and for people to talk about.
Well, I know, listen, this is what you guys want to know. You want to know about the schedule. So let's take a deep dive through this schedule. Folks, we've got really 9 events across 5 months featuring 21 undefeated fighters. And we're talking about 2 World Championship unification bouts. Listen, one of those is for 3 of the belts. The other is for all 4 of those belts. In fact, in total, I'm talking about 7 World Championship matches, 13 belts at stake. All of the top 6 154-pound fighters, you're going to see in action over the next 7 weeks. So, Stephen, here, as we get right into this, let's start with March 26th. Showtime Championship Boxing coming to Minneapolis. It's the U.S. debut of Tim Tszyu, his father, Costa Tszyu. And Costa Tszyu has had so many memorable fights on Showtime Championship Boxing. Talk to me about that card.
Look, it's an exciting card. I mean, we've been watching Tim Tszyu for quite a while. We were witness to his father's, a lot of his father's achievements on Showtime. A lot of his most significant fights were on Showtime. So we had an eye on him, not just because of his talent, but because of the history. And I think this is a really interesting card on March 26th. You've got the U.S. debut of Tim Tszyu. And again, if we look through the card, stepping back for a moment, I think we're trying to do 2 things. Number one, evenly matched fights between top fighters. It's not just a name against somebody you've never heard of. Evenly matched fights, 50-50 fights as much as possible. And secondly, quality top to bottom on the card. So March 26th, Tim Tszyu, up and comer, talked about, very promising. Terrell Gausha is, he's got the credentials, he's got the experience. I don't know who wins that fight. It is a 50-50 fight at the top level. Michel Rivera, one of the most exciting young fighters in the sport, taking on Joseph Adorno. And what boxing fans love, among other things, is discovering the next guy, like the next guy. So, with some of our opening fights, that's exactly what we've tried to do. Elvis Rodriguez, 140-pounder, 12 wins, 11 by knockout, really interesting fighter, taking on a very good veteran test for him in Juan Jose Velasco. So that, to me, is, sort of epitome of the card. Evenly matched, intriguing fights, meaningful fights, top to bottom.
And for people who've seen Michel Rivera, they know that he likes to call himself the new Muhammad Ali. He's got the look. He looks like a young Cassius Clay,
Very much so.
In the look, but an exciting fighter. The next following week, we go to April 9th. We go to the fight capital of the world, Las Vegas. And I'd like to call this one an intriguing crossroads fight. Because at 154 pounds, you've got Erickson Lubin, the Hammer, taking on the tall Sebastian Fundora. It is a title eliminator for the WBC. And for those who would say, what does that mean? Well, the winner basically goes to the front of the line for that WBC belt, which Jermell Charlo has. That's going to be a really, really good fight between those two.
And one of the advantages of rolling out a schedule like this is you can see through the 154-pound division. When you've got in the consensus rankings all top 6 in that division, Charlo, Castaño, Lubin, Tszyu, Fundora, Harrison, 1 through 6, all in order. So now you can literally week by week compare one against the other and say, okay, who's going to be the future of this division? Lubin and Fundora, another one. 2 top guys, top 6 in the division. Great style matchup. Fundora's a tough style matchup for anyone. Tony Harrison and Sergio Garcia is another intriguing fight. And another guy who's making a Showtime debut, a young prospect out of Mexico, Kevin Salgado, 14-0, 9 KOs. He's just 24 years old. So a little bit of everything from from the emerging prospect all the way through the championship level in that card.
And I love that Tony Harrison's on that card as well because, again, former champion there at 154 pounds. And then with the following week, April 26th, we get really one of the most significant fights of the year. It is a unified matchup between the unified champion, Errol Spence Jr., taking on the WBA champion in Yordenis Ugas. It is also the return of Errol Spence Jr. to Showtime. Listen, this is where he started his career and had some of his most significant fights, and they're doing it AT&T Stadium, home of the Dallas Cowboys.
Well, you and I are both Cowboy fans. I know that's so. It'll be a special night. Errol has done really well at Cowboy Stadium and built a home there. We'll be announcing the pay-per-view undercard probably in the next week. Still some things to be firmed up, some signatures there. But look, it's as good a fight as you can get in the welterweight division. Yordenis Ugas has come on strong. From his career path, it's tough not to root for him, given what he's overcome. That breakthrough win, dominant win over Pacquiao. And then you've got Errol Spence, pound for pound, right up there. For my money, he's the best welterweight in the world right now. But that's a tough matchup for him in Ugas.
Yeah, just the 16th unification fight in the Glamour division again, April 16th there in Arlington, Texas. Okay, so then we move to May. And so we get to May 14th, Showtime Championship Boxing, and then we're going to go to Los Angeles. And we finally get the rematch of Jermell Charlo and Brian Castano. And this is for the undisputed title there at 154 pounds. Listen, we know that first fight was an all-action fight. You know this one is going to be exciting. And then even on that co-main of there, you get Jerome Boots Ennis on that card. That's going to be fun in Los Angeles. That's going to be a phenomenal card.
It really is, and we're thrilled that we're able to keep this on Showtime. I think this is going to be the biggest non-pay-per-view card of the year. Certainly the most meaningful. It's an undisputed fight, along with a really, really interesting and meaningful welterweight eliminator as the co-feature. A third fight's going to be added. I think tickets for that fight are going to be hard to come by for sure.
Yeah, you're right about that. And then Boots Ennis is fighting Castillo Clayton, who we saw back in the days when we were there in Connecticut, and he got a draw in that fight. And there are a number of people who believe he won that fight, and Clayton's still unbeaten. That's going to be a really good step up.
Big, strong young fighter. He is got really good amateur credentials. This is a good test for Ennis. People have been saying, look, it looks too easy when Boots is in the ring. Yeah. So we've been stepping up his competition. He's been meeting the challenge, and he's got a big challenge in Clayton.
That's fantastic. Okay, so then the following week, May 21st, Showtime Championship Boxing comes at you from Arizona, basically the home state and hometown of David Benavidez. And David Benavidez is taking on David Lemieux. This is a really good fight there at 168.
That's right. I mean, look, obviously, David's angling for one of the big fights, a super fight in the division. This is the next best thing. Two of the biggest punchers in that division. That's one where I think the ref can just take a coffee break for that fight. What those guys are going to do. There's not going to be a lot of movement. There's not going to be a lot of dancing. They're going to slug it out in the middle of the ring. And there on the undercard, again, we're highlighting another young prospect, Yoelvis Gomez, a Cuban 154-pounder, 5-0, 5 KOs, some highlight reel knockouts as part of that, taking on the veteran Jorge Cota. And that will be an all-action card. That's the goal there.
And the interesting thing, I think, with Benavidez and Lemieux, especially with all the chatter that's going on surrounding Caleb Plant and Andre Durrell, it looks like that fight is basically going to be made, and maybe the winners of Durrell Plant, it seems, will finally be facing Benavidez Lemieux.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the possibilities. I mean, look, as soon as we announce this one, we're on to August, September, October, November.
Yeah.
So, the reality is, we want to stay well ahead of the schedule and be able to start looking even further beyond July.
That's fantastic. Okay, so then the following week on May 28th, Showtime pay-per-view, and I love this because we finally get to go to New York, Barclays Center. Brooklyn, New York, and it is the return of Gervonta Tank Davis, and he's taking on Rolly Romero. And look, this was a fight that was supposed to happen in the past, but these guys are going to finally get it on. By the way, this is going to be the first fight back at Barclays Center since March of 2020. It's been a long time since the Barclays Center has had some boxing, and not only you got Tank in New York, but this is the place where he won his first world title. Remember that Jose Pedraza fight that we
Right, that was certainly a memorable fight. He was on the undercard there on a really great card. I think it was a Charlo headline fight, which, you know, in retrospect, you look back and you had Charlo and Tank on the same card at Barclays Center, phenomenal card. And, you know, coming back and headlining, we're thrilled to be back at Barclays Center. They're one of the strongest supporters of Showtime Boxing over the last 5-6 years. And I couldn't think of a better place for a fight like that.
So then the following week, we get to June. It's Showtime Championship Boxing coming right back at you and right back to Minneapolis, the Armory. And we get Stephen Fulton Jr., the unified champion, and he's taking on Danny Roman. You know, Danny Roman has been begging for a big-time fight. He's the former unified champ. He's done nothing but win since he suffered that one loss. And now, all of a sudden, he gets in with the current unified champ, and Stephen Fulton Jr.
Right, and here we go again. Evenly matched fights between top-tier fighters. And it doesn't get better. You know, that's one of, if you had to pick 2 or 3 favorites on this, at least for me personally, it's tough because there's so many good fights. But when you look at certain ones, you're like, there's just no way that this isn't an exciting fight. And this is one of those. With the style matchup between Fulton and Roman, the skill level of those 2 guys, 2 belts on the line, there's no way that that's not a Fight of the Year candidate.
And then a couple of weeks later in June, Showtime Championship Boxing comes your way from Houston, Texas, the Toyota Center. And on Juneteenth, by the way, which is something that Jermall Charlo started doing just last year, said he wanted to continue to do that, make it an annual thing to fight on Juneteenth, which is obviously very big there in Texas. He has his fight, Masij Sulecki. So talk to me about this fight, Charlo defending his title at 160.
Yeah, you know, the reality is, you know, there's been a lot of discussion. I'm sure there'll be some questions when we get to the media portion of this about, you know, Charlo's journey to this fight, and happy to discuss those. But the reality is, you know, when a super fight like a Canelo versus Charlo fight falls apart, you just have to regroup, move to the next best thing, whether it's, you know, it's going to be Munguia or in this case, Sulecki. Sulecki is a proven contender, a veteran. Only 2 losses to 2 of the best guys in the division, you know, in Danny Jacobs and Billy Joe Saunders. So, you know, this is, I know everybody wanted Canelo Charlo, and, you know, I still want that too. I know Jermall, more than anybody, wants that fight. But this is a really good alternative here, you know, and a quality test there in Houston.
But before we move on, let me ask you about Munguia, because it seemed as if then Charlo Munguia was going to happen. Do you think Munguia and his team wanted that fight?
I have no doubt that Munguia wants a fight. You know, first of all, I would never question the heart of a fighter, and certainly someone as accomplished as Munguia. But Munguia had a deal. He reached agreement. He had accepted the terms of the fight. So I have no doubt, you know, he negotiated out, accepted it, said, okay, I'm willing to participate in this fight in these terms. So for us, his part was done. He accepted the fight. You know, things broke down over networks and, you know, and Munguia's promoters request that we bring in another platform to collaborate with. We can get into some of the details on that, but, you know, the reality, it just didn't make sense. We tried to make some concessions, you know, alternating, you know, we get the fight and, you know, Munguia's network can get the rematch. Ultimately, you know, that never got anywhere, and, you know, we weren't able to reach agreement. So we've got to move on and get Jermall the best available fight after that.
And you know, I think sometimes that's sad that sometimes in this sport, the promoters, when they get involved, you know, things go left. So we go to July, and we're in the heart of the summer, and we're in a great fighting city of San Antonio, Texas. And Mark Magsayo, who we saw dethrone Gary Russell Jr. and take that featherweight title, the WBC featherweight title, gets his first title defense against the unbeaten Ray Vargas.
You know, another one, I'd hate to keep going back to the well, but evenly matched fights among top-tier fighters. Magsayo, brand new titleist. Ray Vargas, established veteran. I don't know how that fight's going to go. It's a 50-50 fight, and that's what we set out to do. And I think we, without patting ourselves on the back too much, I think we achieved that. Top fighters fighting top fighters.
Yeah, this is fantastic. I mean, you look at this here, and we've laid out here over the next basically, few months here, a number of high-stakes, meaningful fights. I know there are people have umpteen questions for you. So let's get to it. All you've got to do, folks, if you take a look at our schedule, is hit the raise your hand icon there on the Zoom. And Chris de Blasio, who's our Senior Vice President of Sports Communications here at Showtime, he will acknowledge you, and then you can ask your question to Steven. So with that, as we take a look at the fight schedule, Chris, I know there are members of the press who have some questions for Steven. Let's get right to them. Fantastic.
Hey, Keith. Yeah, it's interesting. I think normally what people are used to seeing in a situation like this is, prelim fights are streamed, or sometimes there's a special. It doesn't do this card, this undercard justice to call it a prelim stream or prelim fights. I mean, you've got, we're opening the show on the televised portion of that championship boxing with Brandon Lee and Zach Ochoa. Brandon's been getting a lot of heat, 24-0, 22 knockouts, has looked phenomenal. Zach Ochoa, a good young fighter as well. And Budev Stanionis, in that fight to position themselves for ultimately, hopefully a title shot. So that will be its own standalone show leading into the pay-per-view, and that will be on Showtime. It's something that we haven't done, but again, trying to deliver a huge night of boxing top to bottom. And with these two fights, we just had an embarrassment of riches. So the reality is, let's put them on a platform, on the Showtime platform, where they belong, give them the spotlight that it deserves. Correct. And those undercard fights will be announced probably next week.
Next question.
Certainly hope so. I know Deontay was disappointed in that last, the outcome of the last fight. I think he's got nothing to be disappointed about at all. He fought a tremendous fight. I mean, one of the most exciting fights of the year, and a lot of heart displayed by both fighters. So I'm looking forward to having him back. Whenever he's ready to come back, I think he's still got a lot of mileage. I think there are still some mega fights out there for him. So, for my money, Deontay can't come back soon enough. He's fought 12 or 13 times on the network. We'd love to have him back. So, whenever he's ready, I'd love to engage in that conversation. Yeah, I think those are all good ideas, and we've experimented with some of those overall. In the past, getting a free month of Showtime for if you're not already a subscriber, and other ways to provide value. And for us, I think one of the ways we're providing value there is over delivering on the card. not just the 4 fights on the pay-per-view, but 2 other really intriguing fights. So the reality is Budev Stanionis and Lee Ochoa would have been its own standalone Saturday night fight. So, here, if you want to look at it this way, it's a pay-per-view purchase. You're getting 6 fights, including 2 of which were probably worthy of being on a championship show by themselves.
Thank you for the question. Good, Tony.
Hey, Tony. Yeah, look, I wish I had an unlimited checkbook. We all do. I'm not sure, I'm not sure how all of us feel about traveling every single weekend, but we certainly could schedule it that way if we wanted to. But again, we try to strike the balance. We're looking for the cream of the crop, both in terms of the highest level and even at the ShoBox level. So there's a lot out there, and certainly our eyes are bigger than our stomachs, so to speak, on this. There's a lot of fights that we wish we could make. But I think, when we look at the amount of cards that we were doing, 25 live boxing telecasts last year, 18 of which, I believe 18 or 19 of which were championship level fights. There's no one really delivering that level of fights so frequently. So in terms of high-level fights frequently, no one else is doing what we're doing, and we're pushing to do more.
Hey, Dan.
Hey, Dan. Yeah, we're thrilled to be back at Barclays. As many of you know, there was a change of ownership in the Nets and in the Barclays Center, just pre-pandemic. So between the pandemic and change of ownership and a bunch of things going on with New York venues and the requirements to get in, it just wasn't the right time. On top of that, and this is an issue across the sport, we're still dealing with the sort of repercussions of the pandemic shutdown. And one of the things is every music act that had to shut down for 18 months is now on tour. So venues are really tough, and especially top-tier venues. Staples Center, the Barclays Center, among the 2 busiest in the nation. Sometimes there'll be periods of 4, 5, 6 months where they don't have a single Saturday, or maybe only one single Saturday. I think in the first couple quarters of 2022. That March 19th Saturday date was the only date that they had available. So we'd love to be back there, more frequently. The Barclays Center in particular, Staples as well. But it's tough. There's a lot of demand there. But I think going in there and forming the relationship with the new ownership, letting them experience a high-level, exciting event like we've been doing at the Barclays Center is the best way to get more fights at the Barclays Center going forward.
And Caleb Plant.
Oh, that's right. Caleb, again, this is by far not an exhaustive schedule. There are undercard fights, there are ShoBox fights. There's a lot more to be added. So, Caleb fought admirably in the Canelo fight. That was an exciting fight, and he certainly has nothing to be ashamed of. We're looking forward to having him back. He's not in the schedule for through June. But that doesn't mean that he won't be on our schedule in the fall, and whether it's Durrell or Benavidez or both, we look forward to have him back as well. It's a great point, and it's a very big role, and that's one of the advantages. Look, the Zhu Gaucher fight is a big fight in itself, but on top of that, if the winner, whether it's Gaucher or happens to be Zhu, goes on to a title fight, at least in the case of Zhu, that our audience will be more familiar with him going forward. So, we don't always like to see a guy just pop up for a title fight. We'd like to get him there, and if you've been along for the journey with Boots Ennis, you're invested in getting him to a title shot and positioning him in the welterweight division. Same thing with these 154-pounders. I think it's a benefit to the sport when we can sort of show the path toward a title fight. It's not just, hey, here's a title fight, but you can see it coming, months in advance. The chess piece is moving around, and to be able to say, okay, I'm watching this fight, and it's meaningful because the winner of this fight gets X or Y or Z.
And I think that's probably when you look at that 154-pound division, as you pointed out, we have the top 6 guys here. It'd be meaningful to see those guys, whether whoever wins. I mean, heck, Charlo Lubin again would be unbelievable. Charlo Harrison again would be unbelievable. But let's see those guys battle it out and see who's the best of those guys, and then fight the champion.
And it's something that that historically boxing has been criticized for, and I think unfairly so, at least currently. What we're seeing, I think, is more and more losing in boxing doesn't carry the stigma that it once did.
Absolutely.
So when we look at the super bantamweight division, whether it's Stephen Fulton or Danny Roman or Angelo Leo or Rais Alim, it really doesn't matter who wins or loses those fights. The reality, Fulton versus Danny Roman is a good fight because we've seen both of them on. They've been entertaining before. And so we will continue round-robining guys like that. And that's another advantage of putting out a schedule like this, is becoming familiar and looking at the possibilities going forward.
That's good, sir. Next question.
Look, I think it's experimenting. Look, we know not everybody out there is looking forward to maybe 4 or 5 hours of boxing. Certainly our hardcore fans, I think, will appreciate it. So it's an experiment, and in this case, it's really a function of an embarrassment of riches and having so many good cards and so many good fights to do that. Even the pay-per-view undercard wasn't enough to contain all the fights that we had to get done. So I think as long as we can deliver that level of quality, why not double down and make this one of the biggest boxing nights of the year? In this case, 2 really intriguing TV Showtime fights along with a pay-per-view card. That's a fight party. That's a great fight party right there. Yeah, thanks for the question, Melissa. Showtime has a long history in the sport, in combat sports among women, generally, whether it's on the MMA side going all the way back to Gina Carano and Chris Cyborg and Ronda Rousey, and on the boxing side going all the way back to Layla Ali and Christy Martin. And more recently, we've had Katie Taylor on, we've had Amanda Serrano on, we've had Clarissa Shields. We've had sort of the best of the best. Obviously, this card does not currently include any female fighters. I think there's been a run, and I think rightly so, and I think it's a good thing. There have been other platforms who have really made made a run at signing some of those fighters. Obviously, Amanda's fighting in a big fight on another platform coming up. But we are actively looking to populate, with some young fighters. I don't want to, throw any names out while we're working on them, but it is a priority. It is something that has been a priority in the past, and we want to continue the tradition here at Showtime of contributing to and building women's combat sports. Yeah, I think there's a lot of different platforms, from Showbox to streaming to pay-per-view undercards to Showtime. Look, the reality is there's as much talent in women's boxing today as there has been, at any time since it became commonplace in the U.S. And it's only continuing to grow. So I know that we will be, adding some female fighters to this, and I think we're actively looking for the next generation of star female fighters. Great, Marquise. Two good questions. Jake had a really, really busy 2021. 3 big events, 2 of them with us, and it's taking a little bit of time to sort of recuperate and tend to his many other businesses. But we are in discussions with him on continuing. He's looking for, obviously, a noise-making big fight, and I would expect to see him back, this summer at some point, hopefully with us, and hopefully in a really intriguing matchup as well. As for documentaries, we're on the verge of making an announcement of another boxing documentary, a very well-known fighter, not quite of the generation of the Four Kings, something a little bit more recent, but someone who I think has a really interesting story, who hasn't spoken about it before. Not to tease you or be coy, but I think we'll be announcing that within the next couple of weeks, and I think boxing fans will definitely be very excited about that because, as you point out, documentaries of all kinds, and particularly in combat sports, are a critical part of the Showtime programming schedule and part of our commitment to the sport of boxing and combat sports generally. So I think before the end of the year, we'll be seeing probably at least 2 combat sports themed documentaries, probably 1 in MMA, 1 in boxing. Yep.
Yes.
Yes, we got you. Oh, no, it was perfectly acceptable. I understood you completely. Look, most fighters, if not all fighters, love fighting at home and bringing a big, meaningful fight in front of their home crowd. But at the end of the day, it was not difficult. Charlo was not nervous about taking this fight outside of Houston. He'll have his fans in Los Angeles as well, as will Castaño. So look, those guys are professionals. They fought in front of hostile crowds. They fought in front of friendly crowds. So the reality, I think, speaking for most fighters, they just want an exciting crowd, something that's going to add to the event. And certainly in Los Angeles, you're going to get fans of both fighters. You've got a knowledgeable boxing fan base. I think it couldn't be better. A fight of that magnitude deserves, a huge spotlight like the city of Los Angeles will give it.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for your questions, and thank all of you for your questions. Stephen, before we wrap this up, just give you the floor here. Your final comments on this schedule, man. When I look at this, 9 events across 5 months.
Yeah, and that's my response. Is like taking a deep breath. It's sort of like, okay, we were making tweaks to this as recently as about 11 p.m. Last night, rewriting the press release this morning. So it is an endeavor, and now the reality is we'll execute on these fights, but we get to work immediately on fleshing out from July forward, because among everything else, our commitment here is to deliver the best possible fights to our subscribers, and that is something we've been doing for 36 years, as you pointed out in your open. And, we're here, we've been here, we're not going anywhere. We've got a proven business model. We know the sport, we present it better than anyone else, and we've got the passion and belief and the experience of the sport that this sport deserves.
Folks, all you need to know, again, 9 events across 5 months, and you're going to see 7 world championship matches. 13 belts are going to be at stake. You're going to see all top 6 of the 154-pound fighters in the world in action across the next 7 weeks. It is going to be one heck of a schedule. In all, 21 undefeated fighters, 2 world championship unification bouts. One of those unification bouts are going to be for 3 of the belts in the welterweight division. The other, all 4 of the belts, undisputed there at 154. And we're going to kick it off next weekend, March 26th in Minneapolis. It's going to be a fun ride. We cannot wait to see you at the fights. For Stephen Espinoza, I'm Brian Custer. Thank you for watching.